Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week in Illinois in Focus, we'll discuss Republicans' call for an investigation into Governor Pritzker's recent comments in New Hampshire, where he told a crowd of Democrats that they can't give Republicans a moment of peace. We'll also share the story of a Southern Illinois family's battle with the State Department of Human Services over care for their autistic son. And about a month from the end of this legislative session, Republicans are asking, where's the budget proposal? All that and more when we return.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. After two failed assassination attempts last year of then Republican presidential candidate and now President Donald Trump, Republicans in Illinois say Governor J.B. Pritzker is potentially inciting further calls for violence after his comments in a speech last weekend. Joining me to discuss this is the Center Square Illinois editor, Greg Bishop. Greg, what did this governor say, and why are Republicans calling for an investigation into possible criminal incitement?
Yeah, so over the weekend, we had the governor in New Hampshire in front of Democrats who were ultimately saying that, they need to push back against Republicans. But the governor's rhetoric warmed up to a high pitch where he ultimately said, some of the quotes you laid out there, that he never called for mass demonstrations or protests, but he is now. He's calling for disruption. And that quote he had was, they shouldn't give Republicans any kind of peace. But that's just one series of comments he's recently made. Even today, Republican State Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer highlighted comments that Pritzker made in California in front of an LGBTQ community, ultimately saying that the only way to, stop a bully is to punch him in the face, and some other fiery rhetoric. So Republicans have been extremely critical of Governor J.B. Pritzker, saying that he's just trying to, ultimately spread dangerous rhetoric and an aspiration for the White House. And something that I think you have the political temperature being risen, especially with the new Trump administration now 100 days into his administration, and all of the steps that Trump has been taking to shore up spending, to close the border, and the like. But obviously, this is going to continue on, as earlier this week, I talked with Kathy Salvi. She's the Republican Party chairman here in Illinois. And she said that she's calling for an investigation of criminal incitement of Pritzker's words. So obviously, as we just finished up an election, Dan, we're already hearing some pretty heated rhetoric this far out from the 2026 election. Just how much more of this type of rhetoric we're going to hear back and forth, we have yet to see.
And I mean, the fact that Pritzker was talking to Democrats in New Hampshire while he is the governor of Illinois, New Hampshire used to be one of the very first primary states. You have to wonder about all the speculation about, and then using that kind of rhetoric, apparently, to rile up Democrats. You have to wonder, how close is Pritzker to making a decision about the 2028 presidential election?
Well, he still has to make a decision if he's going to run for a third term for governor in 2026, which makes things rather interesting here. So obviously there's going to be a lot of prognostication as to the jockeying for position in 2026. Keep in mind, Dan, as we talked last week, with the announcement that U.S. Senator Dick Durbin was not seeking re-election, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton announced she's running for Durbin's seat. Well, what does that mean for 2026 if Pritzker does indeed run for a third term? Who will be his lieutenant governor candidate for that third term? So, a lot of different ideas and people, postulating what could possibly happen here. with the 2026 election 2 years before we get to the next presidential election in 2028. But back to Pritzker's rhetoric. Pritzker was asked about, for his reaction to what Republicans are saying was his dangerous and violent rhetoric. Pritzker said he only advocates for peaceful protest. He said that the peace that he was talking about, making sure Republicans don't have, was merely just making sure that anybody who opposes Republican priorities uses their megaphone or their microphone to, be on the soapbox and to make sure that they don't have any rest when it comes to the ballot box. But I don't think that's allaying the concerns Republicans have, especially with, as you mentioned, the violence that we've seen towards President Donald Trump, and even the arson and the property damage we've seen of Teslas across the country and Tesla factories and dealerships. Several weeks ago, there were multiple stories of that all across the country. But you have Democrats quick to point out January 6th, saying that Trump and his supporters had a riot on the U.S. Capitol in 2021. And then they even go as far as to say that Trump ultimately pardoned those rioters, some of them who ultimately faced charges of violence against police officers at the U.S. Capitol. So a lot of finger pointing going back and forth. I feel like we're going to be hearing a lot more of this heated rhetoric over the next 10 months heading into the primary, but also into the 2026 election in November.
It almost seems, Greg, like we've reached a time when all of that heated political rhetoric, it's not just saved for election years anymore. It's like it's constant.
No. And it feels like the election season starts earlier and earlier each and every cycle.
All right, let's move on. Greg, you wrote a very interesting story this week, something that we don't often talk about on Illinois in Focus, but that's about real people's sometimes struggles in dealing with state government. If you ever read this story, it's headlined Watch, Illinois family fighting state to keep child with disabilities closer to home. It's got video attached to it. Really interesting story, but essentially tell us the gist of what's going on here, Greg.
Yeah, so the Dorsy family, you have William and Danita Dorsy, mother and father to Gregory Dorsy, a 26-year-old who's been diagnosed with autism, anxiety, and ADHD. Recently, Gregory's condition had him ultimately become violent at home, injuring the mother, and they ended up getting Gregory into the hospital in Taylorville, and they were looking to get him placed at a state-run facility. And they were at the hospital for 17 days. Then ultimately they did get a court order. A judge said that they must place Gregory at Murray Center, which was about an hour and a half away from the Dorsy family. So, not a short trek, but still an hour and a half. And the Dorsy family wanted to keep him at Murray Center. While the state was pressuring, according to the Dorsy family, was pressuring them to give up guardianship in exchange for state-offered services. They didn't want to give up guardianship of their 26-year-old son. They wanted to have control over his care. They wanted to be able to see him when they could, and giving over guardianship would essentially have stripped that away. But that issue seemed to fizzle out a little bit. Now the fight seems to be the Dorsy family going to court to tell the state of Illinois Department of Human Services they want to keep their son closer to home, as the state was trying to get the child transferred to a facility in northern Illinois, which would have been 3.5 to 4 hours, depending on traffic, from the Dorsy family. I did get an update today. They were in court Thursday when we were recording this, and the judge granted the family additional time at the Murray Center as the state is working to make their argument or do an evaluation to see, how Gregory is doing, and they'll make a determination sometime next month at another court case, another court date. But that would be the 7th time this family's had to go to court to go up against the Department of Human Services in their efforts to have control of their family's medical decisions for their son, Gregory. So it really kind of heart-wrenching to hear the family lay out the trials they've had to go through with this. They just want to make sure that their son is well taken care of. And they feel that, they're of an age and their son's of an age where it's best to have them at one of these facilities. And they say that he's doing wonderfully at Murray Center, and transferring him away. The back and forth, the movement around is just not good for Gregory's condition. So, Dan, after I published this story, I've been contacted by others who have similar stories, not just of the proximity to the family where a child with disabilities may be placed, but also this issue of the state pressuring families to give up guardianship in exchange for services. I reached out to the Department of Human Services and asked them two questions. One, what is the policy concerning exchanging guardianship for services? And two, what's the policy concerning proximity to families for placement? Dan, I sent multiple messages to multiple communication people with the Department of Human Services, heard nothing back. I even asked them to just merely let me know that they've got my question and they're working on it. Haven't heard anything back. Today, during a Senate appointment committee hearing, they had the assistant director for DHS getting his appointment through that committee. While I was able to get up there and I approached and asked them if they could possibly give me comments, they said no comments, and that their communication people would get back to me. So we still have yet to hear back from the Department of Human Services on that issue. And again, I think the story of the Dorsy family is just one of several that we're likely to hear about as families see there's the way to get their story out. And if they're willing to talk, we'll hear their story. Because I'm hearing from others, and even State Representative Charlie Meyer, who's been pretty intimate in these types of cases. He has a stack of other cases already that he's dealing with, and cases from the previous years of similar instances of families being pressured to give up guardianship in exchange for services and the proximity issues. So this story is not going to go anywhere, and I think that it needs a lot of sunshine on it. There's no question.
Agree, 100%. Taxpayer dollars fund the Illinois Department of Human Services. Yours, mine, every state taxpayer across Illinois. This agency is supposed to be there to help families. And yet it looks like every step of the way they working against them. And this whole thing over guardianship, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
And one of the things, I'm trying to determine is there a policy of internally having DHS lawyers go to courts to pressure relinquishing of guardianship in exchange for services? And if that is the case, what's the motivation there? One source suggested that there could be a motivation of if a individual is a ward of the state, that comes paying for those services comes from a specific line item in the budget. Whereas if they're not a ward of the state, then paying for those services comes from a different line item. So what's the motivation there? If that is the case, then, is it because they're looking for matching federal dollars to, pad DHS's budget? Again, I don't have those answers yet because the Department of Human Services has not been open with responding to my questions, even not just via email, but even in person with agency officials, high-ranking agency officials. So we'll stay on top of this, and hopefully we do get to some answers, because it's not just the Dorsy family that's being impacted by this. It is scores of families, I imagine, I've already been told about that might be willing to go on record with their story.
And well, I do look forward to your continued reporting on this, Greg. As you and I said before we started broadcasting, this needs a lot of sunlight shine on it. If in fact it's true that there are, for example, two separate buckets of cash or taxpayer dollars that gets funneled into the Department of Human Services, and they're making a decision over guardianship based on those financial things, the state legislature needs to get involved, because they should not be making decisions based on the avenues of revenue that's coming into their services. I'm going to move us on, Greg, because I get more and more upset the more we talk about that. Of course, the state legislature is in session. For years, there's been ongoing discussions about what to do with public transit in the state of Illinois. Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson visited the Capitol on Wednesday of this week, where they talked about public transit and wanting more dollars for public transit from the state legislature. Tell us more.
Yeah, obviously, when you have the budget coming together here in the final weeks, they have a May 31st deadline to approve a budget with simple majorities. We're in a time right now where there are tons of special interests here at the Capitol when legislators are in looking for more, looking for, carve outs for them to get more funds than they got the year before. And that includes, city officials and county officials like Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. So he came to Springfield to talk about all kinds of different revenue streams and tax increases that he's looking to capture so that the city of Chicago can get more funds. He even is on this push about a progressive income tax, even though voters disapproved of that back in 2020. But part of the conversations were also the $700+ million fiscal cliff that the state's regional transit authority is facing in 2026. And that could be detrimental for mass transit in the Chicagoland area and beyond. So there's this push to bring about a consolidated transit authority that would wrap in all of these different transit agencies. But obviously that's going to be a tall order, especially with that $700+ million fiscal cliff that they're facing. So they've had tons of hearings about this. Clearly, it's something that we may not really get the specific details about until just before the end of session, with as big of a ticket item as this is and possible reforms. But you have, the Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle, and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson lobbying to get that done, including the revenue enhancements they say are needed, the tax increases they say are needed to get this across the finish line. That's just one small item in the overall budget talks that are going on here at the state capitol.
We're now about a month, but let's face it, it's less than a month. It's already May. They're scheduled to end at the end of May. The budget is essentially the priority for state lawmakers to get. Year in and year out, Democrats who control both the House and the Senate wait till the last minute to drop their budget proposal onto other lawmakers and onto us, the taxpayers. It's usually within the last 2 days or so. Once again, this year, Republicans are saying, hey, we're less than a month out. Where's the budget?
Well, not just where's the budget, but where are they and their seats at the table to get to the nitty gritty details of how much tax dollars are going to be spent. And that was something Republicans, they held a news conference today to highlight that. They say that they've been part of the conversation at a 10,000 foot level, but State Representative Noreen Hammond said essentially from her understanding and having been a legislature for a while, she sees that Democrats are going it alone, which means in her opinion, that's just going to be more frivolous spending and more tax increases. Republicans also pushed back on a group that's proposed $6 billion in tax increases. The Illinois Revenue Alliance announced a myriad of proposals that they say would increase taxes by $6 billion in the state of Illinois. And you got to even harken back to, this idea of a progressive income tax that State Senator Robert Martwick has a resolution to get that back on the ballot. That really hasn't advanced. We haven't seen that move, but the conversation is still out there floating around. But you have a lot of spending that's Republicans are questioning. Including contracts for non-government organizations. They want more oversight. And the conversation also, looking at Department of Government Efficiency type of review of state spending. When I ask Democrats about that here at the Capitol, they push back and say, we don't need to take a chainsaw approach. We need a scalpel approach to find efficiencies. And as far as the details of the budget, State Senator Laura Murphy, who's a vice chairman on the Senate Appropriations Committee, she said, hey, we're starting with the governor's proposed budget from February. So that's out and about. People can look at that. But Dan, that's not going to be the final budget. And like you said, time and again, and I've been covering the State House for 11 years now, it has always been last minute. They will release the thousands of pages of the budget details. Typically, it's late at night, and then they'll have a committee hearing, and then they'll take it to the chamber, and they'll vote on it, and then it'll be in the next chamber. Sometimes it could be 3:00 in the morning when they pass it out of one chamber. So that's not a lot of time for taxpayers to see what's in the budget before it ultimately gets voted on by their representatives.
Yeah, and that's not fair to anybody, including elected Democrats who aren't in these budget negotiations day in and day out, because this 1,000+ page bill, as you mentioned, gets dropped on them at the 11th hour too, and they have to figure out what they're voting on. Are there tax increases that are going to affect my constituents? And of course, Republicans never see the budget until the last minute. But then you and me and other taxpayers across the state, we don't know what's in it before their votes. So how do we know how to tell our elected representatives how to vote on such things? It's just the lack of transparency year in and year out. Of course, this dates back to longtime former Illinois House Speaker, now convicted of multiple corruption charges, former House Speaker Michael Madigan. Same rules apply during the current legislature.
It really feels there is a playbook. It's an unpublished playbook, and it's a pressure campaign. And it's always last minute. Some pressure's on for legislators who are going to have 12, 13, 14-hour days. And if they want to go home, they got to vote on the budget. So it's how it feels whenever, as a journalist here on the ground in the Capitol, watching this happen. There's a level of frustration you can see among Republicans. And you can imagine that when taxpayers wake up and read the news and see that a budget passed, the most expensive budget in state history, $55 billion, is what it could be when it comes out in the wash. They won't know the details until it's already passed and headed towards the governor's desk.
Time for one more story, Greg. The Illinois Board of Higher Education is facing questions from lawmakers about some recent audits and financial noncompliance, including late payments to schools. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and this goes into the overall budget conversation and oversight. So the Auditor General for the state of Illinois reported to the Legislative Audit Commission, a bipartisan group, about the Illinois Board of Higher Education, where there were multiple audit findings that are repeated. And a lot of that deals with not getting funds out to higher education institutions on time. The Auditor General found the board made late voucher payments to schools 90% of the time in fiscal year 2023. And they had more than a dozen different findings, 17 compliance recommendations, 9 of which were repeated. So clearly there's some issues at the Illinois Board of Higher Education that legislators are concerned about. So people can read more about that, of course, at thecentersquare.com. But Dan, before we do wrap up here, I want to make sure that we also talk about another big budget issue, and that's the taxpayer subsidies for non-citizen migrants. The governor's plan does eliminate part of that program. He's also wanting to scale back some of the funds for welcoming centers. And you have special interest groups here on the Capitol pushing for more funding for welcoming centers and to keep the health benefits for immigrant adults intact, if not put more money into that. But all of this going on, Dan, while the state of Illinois faces that federal lawsuit from the U.S. Department of Justice challenging the state's sanctuary policies. And that case continues. I did ask both Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle for their reaction. And they said that they're going to stand up against the Trump administration on this issue, despite the Trump administration saying that the state policies are hindering ICE from getting violent non-citizens arrested and deported, let alone the public safety issues that also are problematic. So all of these things obviously come with a taxpayer cost, and we'll be watching it here with the Center Square.
Look forward to your and your team's, Greg's continuing coverage of what's going on in the Capitol in Springfield. But that is all the time we have. Thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all the stories we talked about and more at thecentersquare.com.